Welcome to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the golf podcast that interviews the best and brightest minds in the golf industry. Now, here's your host, Bernard Sheridan.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you have many times in the past. So I've been following you for quite a while now, and I really like a lot of the information that you're giving out there. It's really helping grow the game of golf. So we definitely thank you for that. So the first question that we always ask right out of the gate here on Breaking Par is, when is the very first time you picked up a golf club?
Oh, I would say I was most probably around 10 years old. My dad was a keen golfer. This is back in South Africa. I'm from South Africa originally, and obviously grew up there. And my dad was a good player, and I used to remember on Sunday afternoons, once the golf course slowed down, we lived fairly close to the course. We would go out and walk. There was like a little 4-hole loop that was quite close to our house, and he would let me hit a couple of shots, and we would walk this 4-hole loop. And I got to the point where I just couldn't wait during the week to get out there and go and play those 4 holes. And we had a little net set up in the backyard, and I'd just pound balls into the net all week long to get ready for the Sunday loop.
Yeah, we had, I lived right across the street from a golf course, a private course actually, and I grew up in basically in the 60s and 70s, and when I was a young boy, I would go across, and behind my neighbor's house, there was an opening in the fence, and we would go into the fence, and we would do everything out there. We would shoot squirrels, we would play. There was an area where we would play football. We'd go out and play like 3 or 4 holes, just like you did. That little, it was actually like the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th hole we would play. Yeah. And when we were out there, we would go out really like during the day when there were members out there.
Yeah.
And so at that time, of course, there weren't any cell phones, right?
Yeah.
So they couldn't tell anybody that we were out there until they made the turn. Yeah. And once they made the turn and got to the halfway house, they would tell somebody, usually the greenskeeper, and the greenskeeper would come flying out on this green cart, this special green cart that was faster than any cart that we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And we'd see him coming, and we'd all scatter. And then he would, those darn kids type thing. Yeah. And then he would leave, and we'd go right back out. And we did that like every Easter vacation. And that was like our fun for Easter vacation, was to torture the greenskeeper. So, and get some golf in too, which was a good time. So for you, when did the little light bulb go off that you decided maybe you wanted to do it as a career?
Nah, I think perhaps that was a little bit of my problem, was I never really viewed it as a career. And I knew that I loved golf, and we had a group of buddies in the neighborhood who would go out and we would play from sun up to sundown, and then, loop the bag on the shoulder and walk home kind of thing. But, I just knew that I wanted to play, and I wanted to play as well as I could, and ended up getting a college scholarship to come over and play golf in America, which was fantastic. I was a naive young 17-year-old coming over and didn't know, anything, which I think was a bit of a blessing, because I came over, I didn't know the people I was living with, I didn't know where I was living, I didn't know where I was going, but it all worked out, and we figured it out, and ended up playing some pretty good golf in college. And then I thought, hey, let's see if we can play professionally. I think so many golf coaches in the business today got into golf because at some point in their life they loved golf so much that they wanted to play it for a living.
And then, what was the history with that? I mean, because you ended up in instruction, so yeah. I'm thinking that it wasn't what you planned.
Yeah. Invariably. I played college golf, obviously, for 4 years at Central Florida in Orlando, and I did quite well. I was a second-team All-American my final year, and chased the dream, played professionally for 3 to 4 years, 3.5 years or so. Went to tour school a few times, didn't really have enough success there. And I was taking lessons from David Ledbetter in Orlando at the time as well. And David had got to a point where he was looking for some new instructors. And so he contacted me and said, hey, I see you're playing. I see it's not going that great for you. How about teaching? And so I thought, let me see how that goes. I knew I loved the game, and I've always been a believer in stick with what you know. Not that I knew teaching, but, as a young mid-20s something male, I thought, well, I know teaching. I've played a lot of golf, and so, I can help some people. And here we are all these years later still learning.
It's a never-ending quest to learn more information. I mean, a big reason why I even have this show.
Yeah.
I know that I get to talk to so many great instructors. David Ledbetter was actually one of them, and just to tap into that knowledge, and then I learn a tremendous amount every show that I do, and then I also, of course, pass all that out to the audience. So that they can learn too. So it's some pretty cool stuff.
I had just touching into that, Bernard. I had a great discussion with Martin Chuck a couple of months back, and I said to him, we were driving to some golf school or something together, and I said, do you remember back in the day when you thought you knew everything about the golf swing or about golf? And he said, yeah, I used to think that regularly, and then I'd go about 2 years later, no, I got it. Now I really know everything. I said to him, I haven't thought that for about 2 decades. I said, is that a bad thing? He said, no, I think that's a good thing, because as we get older, we get wiser, and we realize, hey, you're never going to know it all. But it does keep the door open to entertaining new ideas, new thoughts, and ultimately growing.
I think it's a lot the way it is when we're youths, that when we're teenagers, we think we know everything. Like right when we hit about 18, 19 years old, we really think we know.
We got this.
We got it. We got it all figured out. Mom and Dad can't tell us really anything that we don't know. We probably know more than they do. At least that's how we feel. And
Sure.
Then we hit somewhere around 25, 26, and we start to realize that we don't know anything. And we really need to just keep learning as much as we possibly can. And I think it's a lot like that for golf instructors. The first few years, after you've been doing it for a little while, you really feel like you got this. You really know what you're doing. And then as you start to move through it, you realize that you know what you're doing, but there's so much more to learn, and so many other ways to figure it out, and to show it to someone, and to explain it. And I think today, especially too, with all the technology that we've seen over the past 10 years, we start to realize that what we thought was correct, we were a little bit mistaken about.
Sure. It's dispelling a lot of long-held myths about either how the ball flies, or how we swing a golf club, or how we move our bodies.
That's absolutely true. Now, I know for you that you are very heavily into TrackMan, and
Yes.
and using that as a learning tool to discover information about different things that happen at impact, and with spin rates, and
Sure.
path, and ball flight, and all those things, and you use that to actually when you gather that information, you're using that to actually pass that information on to your students, but not to make it confusing, which I've noticed a lot in what you do.
That's got to be the objective. There's a lot of instructors out there, and so many of them work towards specializing in certain areas, whether it be teaching tour players, or short game, or putting, or equipment. I've really tried to angle my philosophy and my communication towards everyday golfers. just golfers out there who are looking to hit better shots and enjoy themselves more. And my experience as I've worked with them, Bernard, has been that it's easy to confuse them. It's easy to speak a language with which they are not familiar. And so I'm always trying to, A, get a better understanding, but B, find a simple way to explain a certain piece of information, a certain element to them so that they can understand it and have a nice clear picture as to how to move forward.
Now, do you feel as instructors that a lot of us feel like we know all these terms, and then when we use them and throw them out there to everyday golfers, that we kind of feel like because we're so familiar with them that they'll understand those terms too?
100%. And I think it's also part of gaining experience. As we get older, we get wiser, hopefully. My dad once said to me, he said, with age comes wisdom, but sometimes age arrives alone. And I think it's important for us to be wise in our communication, and we've got to be able to relate to the person standing in front of us. We've got to relate to that unique individual who's coming to us and saying, can you please help me? And in order for us to be able to help them, we've got to be able to connect with them on their level. Instead of trying to use fancy terms and show the student how smart you are, let's try to help them. Let's try to help them and use a language that matches up with their knowledge base.
Now, I know that you're now with Revolution Golf, and you're getting some information out there pretty often, it looks like, with them. How did you end up with Revolution Golf? Did they approach you? And what made you decide to go with them?
Yeah, they did approach me. I must say, when they approached me initially, I didn't know enough about Revolution Golf. But I will say this, my affiliation with Revolution Golf has been the biggest and best thing that's ever happened to me in golf instruction, simply because it's a fabulous platform that allows me to reach an audience. And I can reach keen golfers who love golf and who want to learn and play better, everyday golfers. And once they hear my information, that certainly opens the doors for them to be able to come out and take a golf school, come out and take a couple hours worth of lessons. And so it's been fantastic for business. It's also been a good eye-opener for me on that communication front, as I've had to streamline the way I say certain things and be very careful about the way I say certain things, because it's easy to confuse people and mislead them.
That's very true. I find that a lot, and I think that in general, golf is can be very confusing.
It can be.
You know, for the fact that certain things that we do are so counterintuitive in that game, and I always used to tell my students, I'd say, just think of Seinfeld and George Costanza. And he would always say, whatever I do, I'm just going to do the opposite, and it'll be fine. And
opposite George.
Right. And if you do that in golf, what you think it is, usually it's the opposite. So just do the total opposite of what you think it is, and it usually will work a little bit better than what you think.
Yeah. I find that in everyday life, our instincts help us get through the day quite well. Our instincts when it comes to controlling a golf ball tend to not always lead to the right thing. It's not as we perceive it to be. And that's why it's so important for golfers out there to just get a little bit better understanding. I know there are people who are listening to this information as we chat to each other, Bernard, who are going, I don't need golf lessons. I'm just going to listen and read and pick up things online. And that's well and good, but it's amazing once people get face-to-face, they get themselves in front of a qualified, experienced golf instructor, and the difference that it can make. Because at the end of the day, they may know good information, but they don't, and I'm talking about the student here, the athlete, they
Yes.
may be aware of good information. They're just not sure which information to apply to their game and how to apply it.
I think, too, it's also the way that they interpret the information, too.
Definitely.
Because what we say as instructors in a show like this, or maybe on videos online, or maybe if we produce videos and we sell them, that information, I've always found, you can't ask that instructor exactly what they mean at that time. Explain this a little bit differently to me. I'm like, I kind of don't get this part of it. You can't do that. You have to say, oh, that's what it is, and digest it the way that you believe it is.
Sure.
And that's not always correct. That's, I think, a part of the reason why with some of my students, I'll have supervised practices, so that when I'm watching them practice, they're doing exactly what I intended them to do, not their interpretation of what I intended them to do.
Yes.
And it makes a big difference.
Differentiation. Yeah.
So you have done some series of videos. One that I'm a big fan of is the Wedge Project. So first, tell me what made you decide to attack that project, and what are some of the, for our audience, what are some of the findings that you found that maybe debunked what a lot of people believe?
I like that. I would say, Bernard, when I got exposed to TrackMan in the spring of 2010 was when I was able to get my hands on a TrackMan and really start using it. One of the shots, the first shots that I really wanted to understand better was, we've all hit that wedge shot that comes out much lower than the rest, and it seems to hit the green, skip once, skip twice, and then really grab on that third bounce. And I wanted to understand that shot, and so I just got on TrackMan and started hitting shots, and that kind of mushroomed into something much, much bigger as I looked to find a way to get people to understand that shot better, and if they knew what the product was, they would perhaps be able to produce it that much more often. And I came up with some ideas, most of which I would still stand by to this day. I think I came out with that perhaps 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. But I really do like the information in the Wedge Project, and for the average golfer out there that I see, the vast majority of them tend to stick the club in the ground too often. And if you put the club in the ground once, now you've developed this aversion to the ground, and you're always going to be a little shy of getting the clubs. And that angle of attack, I've found, is important for the everyday golfer, because they don't get to practice wedge shots all the time. And if you get yourself off track with pitching and chipping, it's not easy to just all of a sudden start hitting good shots again.
Well, I know that a lot of players with wedges, they feel that they have to attack it at a steeper angle, and in your findings, you have found that is absolutely not correct.
That is not correct. You can hit a beautiful low launching, high spinning wedge shot by hitting down on it steeply, and you can hit a beautiful low launching, high spinning wedge shot by hitting down on it very little. It's all really about friction between the face and the ball, and that comes from clean contact. People have been led to believe that hitting down on the ball, trapping it, pinching it, which we cannot really do, right, leads to high spin. That is not entirely true. Hitting down on the ball steeply tends to clean up the quality of contact between the face and the ball, and that is what leads to that high spin strike. You can, over the course of a round of golf or several rounds of golf, have far greater success by hitting down on the ball to a lesser degree and just skimming that club along the ground. I use the analogy of landing a plane on a runway. Feel like you're going to land the sole of that club on the ground underneath the golf ball and just have it skim along the ground. You're going to hit lovely shots. You might not have the highest spin rate in the world. That is not necessary to hit great pitch shots. You just need enough spin.
Now, do you find too that a lot of players with their clubs don't take attention to making sure that face and those grooves are really clean before they take a shot? I find that some of my students will come in and they'll basically have their clubs weren't even clean from the last round of golf, and there's stuff caked on them, and they're going to hit balls, and they're not even paying attention to that, and then they're wondering why they're not getting numbers that they should be, and distances that they should be, and it's coming out there like a knuckleball. And so do you find that a lot? And do you think that I know that you're an advocate of making sure that face is super clean before they take that shot?
I'd love to see the face as clean as possible, as dry as possible. The golf ball be a premium type golf ball. That's when they're best able to hit those super sexy, low launching, spinning wedge shots that are going to one hop and stop, just like the pros do. Because keep in mind, the golf ball doesn't know that a PGA Tour player is getting ready to hit it. Okay, it just says, whoa, that was a nice clean strike with a clean, dry golf club. It's amazing, the players, from tour players to, I had a golfer the other day, I was illustrating to him the effect of water when it gets caught between the face and the golf ball. This player has played in 4 U.S. Opens, and I had him hit a couple of regular shots, and then I wet the ball in the face, and he hit a shot, and the ball launched 10 degrees higher with a quarter the amount of spin of the previous shots, and he went, wow, that was amazing. He never knew that. Here's somebody who's played in 4 U.S. Opens. It's the role of friction is huge when it comes to not only the trajectory that the ball flies at. Less friction will be higher launch, higher flight, lower spin. So the ball's going to launch higher, plummet out the sky because it doesn't have very much spin, hit the green, and take off. The ideal wedge shot is just the opposite of what we're looking for with the driver. Driver is high launch, low spin. Wedges, we're looking for low launch, high spin. And that comes from good friction. Technique plays a role, certainly, but the kingpin when it comes to launching that ball low and spinning it a lot is going to be friction.
And they're going to have a lot more control over those shots if they launch it that way.
Exactly. I had somebody in a golf school a couple of weeks ago say to me, but Andrew, I want to hit majestic pitch shots. And to me, a majestic pitch shot is a high pitch shot. And if you look at all the best wedge players in the world, they hit low pitch shots. So I said to them, I said, so you don't like to get the ball close very often? And they just laughed. And, I went through the whole presentation and they started to get an understanding. It's far more controllable if we can launch that ball low with enough spin.
I totally agree. I work with a lot of students in the fact that I always try to get them to understand that the higher you hit the ball, the more difficult it is to control the actual distance that the ball goes.
For sure.
Especially for amateur players.
Especially for golfers of every ability.
Yeah.
For golfers of every ability. That's why when we're just off the edge of the green, we're going to invariably play some kind of a bump and run shot instead of a lob shot.
Right. Because
it's easier to control. The same thing gets extrapolated out into those 40, 50, 60, 80-yard shots.
Now, what do you think makes them want or believe? Because I live right here on a golf course, okay, in Southwest Florida. I walk out. All I have to do is sit there and drink my coffee, and I can see what they're doing coming into the third hole. Mm-hmm. And I watch so many players, and of course the lies here are pretty tight in Southwest Florida. There's not a lot of rough going on in Southwest Florida.
Yeah.
And they're always hitting these high shots that land and just release and don't stop. And I'm thinking to myself, what makes them think that this is the desired trajectory that they want? I mean, why do you think they think it's so I don't know whether, I guess it's almost like they think it's sexy to hit this high shot. I think it's sexy to hit this low spinner that just bump, bump, just takes a couple of hops and quits.
Exactly. I really do think that's their concept. It's the same concept as when I say to people who are playing on Bermuda grass, which direction does grain grow? They all go, every one of them goes towards the setting sun. And grain on Bermuda grass, as you know, grows predominantly downhill.
Yes.
You can have grain 2 feet apart, one going to the left, one going to the right, because the slope changes. And they just have heard that, and they think, oh, pitching should be high, and that's the right way to pitch. But it's not. And it's our job to spread the good news and get everyone converted over to hitting the lower checky pitch shots, chip shots.
The only other thing that I can think of that maybe people think that that's what they should do is because for the longest time, Phil Mickelson always hit these little high flop shots that landed close to the hole when he was around the green, make this huge swing. And so that's the only thing that I can think of because he was, you know, of course, predominantly extremely popular on tour for a very long time and still is.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of things that Phil did in the beginning of his career that when he changed it up a little bit, he was more of a swashbuckler. But then when he changed it up and got a little bit more controlled, all of a sudden the floodgates opened for him. And
Sure, yeah. And golfers like to pick that one outlier. You know, when I'm talking about majestic pitch shots to my students, they'll often mention Phil. When I'm talking about the pace of a golf swing, they'll often mention Hideki.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's got that nice, slow, deliberate look to the top of the backswing. Well, let's talk about the whole rest of the field. What are they doing? Instead of singling out one unique outlier and say, well, Phil Mickelson, do you know how many hours Phil has practiced lob shots, flop shots for? Most probably more hours than most of the everyday golfer has spent practicing golf.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, he even had a short game area in his backyard when he was a kid.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who this is all he worked on, and he, not all that he worked on, but the bulk of what he worked on when he was a junior, and he, because he just loved it, and that he had access to it. And the average player, they can't put in that kind of time.
They cannot. Life gets in the way. The real world.
Always. Say that all the time. Life gets in the way of golf all the time.
Life gets in the way. Yeah.
But that's okay though, because life has so many other things to offer. I mean, golf offers a lot. It mirrors life.
Golf for the people that I suspect you and I deal with on a daily basis. Golf is a getaway. Golf is a retreat. It's their leisure time. They want to go and enjoy it and hit some good shots. And I know from my own personal game, I may not shoot the best score for me, but if I go out there and I hit some shots that feel good and I have a sense that I can play the game, that's when I'm having fun. That's when I'm enjoying it. That's when I'm excited about coming back tomorrow or next week. That's really what the game should be about.
So you use swing catalyst too, yes?
I do, yes.
Okay, so do we here at Impact Zone. I mean, I love swing catalyst. I think it's great. So when players are hitting this type of shot, have you ever looked at this on swing catalyst and what's going on there? Where's their pressure going?
You're talking the low little pitchy shot.
Yeah, that same shot.
I think it's a narrower, skinnier, condensed version of a big swing. It does something very similar. And some people will, you know, the pressure definitely it starts more forward, it stays more forward, but it still moves into the trail foot as that club goes back, and it still moves into the lead foot on the way down. Some players will have it go more onto the front part of the foot. Other players will, as they rotate their body through the shot, will have it go more into the heel.
Now, I see a lot of players on swing catalyst. We see after impact, we see a backup a lot of times.
Yeah.
And what we want to see is a constant movement towards the front foot. No percentage is backing up, correct?
I would say it depends what club, Bernard. I've seen some of the best drivers on the planet. And typically when I call it a power swing versus a control swing. And there are fabulous golfers on the PGA and LPGA tour who have what I call a four-way trace. It goes backwards, forwards, backwards, and forwards. That's what the backup. That's the backup. The second backup that you're referring to there.
Right.
And then other players who typically don't hit the ball as far with their driver will have little to no backup. But if you take an accomplished golfer who's backing up that trace with their driver, and you get them to hit a controlled 8-iron, it won't back up. Because they're not pushing themselves, and it's essentially that vertical force. When they push themselves up off the ground, they alleviate the pressure on their lead foot, and it, as a result, goes into their trail foot and then moves back forward as they land, because they've pushed off the ground so much.
And that's more with their longer clubs than with their irons?
In better accomplished golfers, I've only seen a backup with a driver.
Okay.
I can't say I've looked at a lot of 3-woods on Swing Catalyst. I suspect you would see some of that there too. But I haven't seen accomplished players do it with an 8-iron. When they're trying to hit their 8-iron, their number, I don't see it.
Yeah, so we might see a slight stall, but not a backup.
Not a backup. Not a backup. Now, you might see it with, Joe, the 18 handicapper,
Yes.
and that's a problem. Okay, that's a problem. That's indicative of a problem. And one of the challenges with learning how to best interpret the data that Swing Catalyst provides us with is having that complete understanding. I know when I first got it, I thought, straight back, straight through, and it's got to be, 50-50 at address and 80-20 at the top of the backswing and 20-80 at impact. That's how it should be. But, the more I used it, I've come to learn that there are a vast array of different center of pressure traces that people can have success with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's because when you think about it, there's a vast array of swing styles that people
Sure.
can have success with. And those styles are going to change pressure traces. That's their little fingerprint, so to say, of their swing. I think that a lot of the times when we use technology like Swing Catalyst is, let's find out what the student is doing the best. Let's look at that. Let's try to reproduce that.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to get them to be, like you said before, at a certain point in their swing with pressure, because there is no exact for every single person. Everybody is an individual and must be treated as such.
Correct. And that's one thing in the last decade that's become 100% clear to me, is that every golfer is unique. There is no one thing in the golf swing that guarantees anything for anybody. Setting up square, setting up properly, gripping the club neutrally, getting the club straight at the top. There is no one thing that guarantees anything. At the end of the day, we've got to find, as coaches, as instructors, we've got to find that golfer's unique formula that enables them to function better. And that's our job.
I agree, and it's not that easy to do in a short period of time.
Not at all. It's not an easy thing, and I think experience is required.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think a lot of students who come, they believe that it's going to be achieved quickly.
Yes.
And it could be just because of the age that we live in, and everybody wants instant results because they're used to that. You throw your meal in the microwave, and 30 seconds later it's warm and you're ready to eat. Yeah. And you pick up the phone and there's somebody on the other end, and you want to find out information. You hop on Google or wherever, you type it in, and it's right there. So I think that a lot of players believe that that's the way it should be with golf, that they should come for a few lessons and then fix whatever the issue is and then go play well. But it's a process that takes time. Us as instructors already understand that. And they have to understand that too, that it's, I always attributed it to like music. If you're going to learn a musical instrument, you can't go take a couple of lessons and then go play at a party that you're going to and expect to get everybody to go, yay, and you're great and everything. And
yeah. That's a good analogy.
yeah, I mean, it's really not that easy. It takes time to understand the information, to digest the information, to apply the information. It's definitely a process. But most people, I think, enjoy that process, or they wouldn't be continually doing it.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
So for our listeners who would like to have the opportunity to work with you, and I believe you are in Savannah, Georgia?
Correct. I'm at the Westin Savannah Harbor Resort, which is obviously in Savannah, and great spot, fabulous resort, right across the river from downtown Savannah. I've really enjoyed being there.
So how does it compare to South Africa? And what are the, you know?
Well, Bernard, there's no elephants on the range and that, we have a lot of that in South Africa. No, I'm just kidding. It's the same. Hey, it's the same. Where I grew up in South Africa, we were at a little higher altitude. The golf ball would go a long way, but the grass was very similar. The greens were very similar. The size of the hole was the same, and bad shots ended up in bad places and good ones didn't. Same thing. Very similar.
And you go back quite often, do you not?
Yes. Actually, my wife and I have, we noticed quite a few years ago that January in the low country, it's a little chilly, and people tend to not play as much golf in January. And so we decided, let's diversify what we offer for golfers. And we said, we're going to do couples golf trips to South Africa. And so we're doing this coming January. In just over a month, we leave for our 12th trip to South Africa. And it's a 2-week trip. We do a week in Cape Town, where we play golf and sightsee and go to wineries and eat great food. And then we do a week at the end of the trip where we go on safari and we get into the bush and we experience those two completely different elements, sides to South Africa. And it really is a great trip. We love it. We look forward to it as if it's our first time going. So we do that. Yeah, we do manage to get back.
It sounds like an exciting trip. And so for our listeners, if they want to go on that trip, or if they want to work with you, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
The best way, Bernard, and I would love to chat to any of your listeners pertaining to golf trips or golf schools or golf lessons or anything you feel like I could help out with. If you Google Andrew Rice Golf, you're going to find me. It's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's my website, andrewricegolf.com. There's tons of information on there. I've got a blog and I post fairly regularly on there with new little videos and pieces of information that I'd like to share with people. So happy to help out.
Well, Andrew, thanks a lot for being with us. We really appreciate it, and much continued success. You're a fine young guy who's really making a big difference in the game, and it's great to see that.
Bernard, thanks. I really enjoyed it and appreciate being on.
Yeah, until we meet again, what we always like to say in parting is do your best to keep it in the short grass.
I will.
All right, take care.